Hi everyone, welcome to today's design tips session. We're going to be talking all about removing the stress from the creation of e-learning, so hopefully a subject dear to all of your hearts. My name is Will Brown, Head of Learning Consultancy here at Elucidat, and my team's role is all about supporting Elucidat customers to achieve their goals. So obviously, content creation is a really big part of this. So looking forward to sharing some of my experiences with you and also hearing about yours and hoping that as well as being maybe a bit of a kind of group therapy session, that we'll all come away with some great tips and tricks to make all of our lives easier. And I've got Kirstie with me today as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Will. Hello, everybody. I'm Kirstie Greany from Elucidat. I'm Head of Learning Strategy here. I've worked in L&D for more than 2 decades, which is quite a long time now, so over 20 years. And at Elucidat, you might see me hosting the podcast and hosting roundtables to draw out insights from our lovely customer community and try and share back some tips and tricks to help you with those across the board as well. So yeah, pleased to be here with Will. Yeah, let's get stuck in.
Cool. So it's become a bit of a tradition, but we're going to start with quite a broad, open question. But then we're going to hone in on different areas throughout the webinar. So please, if you can just think about some of the biggest e-learning headaches that you face, and then chuck those in the chat. And yeah, as I say, we'll be bringing those in throughout the webinar as well. So as luck would have it, towards the end of last year, we actually conducted a survey with L&D professionals to gather insights on exactly this subject. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see kind of what we found out during that survey and how that stacks up with what comes into the chat during the session as well. So let's take a look and see what our survey said. So the first theme that emerged was around time management. So I think quite often the tasks related to content creation require quite a lot of focus and attention. So this in turn demands quite a lot of our time. So getting that really good quality, uninterrupted times. And I think whether you're a part-time author, who's also expected to be on call, for your day job, as it were, or if you're a full-time L&D professional who is just required to manage multiple projects simultaneously, it can always be a challenge to find those blocks of high-quality focus time. And this is often made more difficult by the fact that the process can be quite time-consuming as well.
As well as time management, I think what we heard is for a lot of people, especially you imagine newbies out there, so novice authors, getting started can often be one of the biggest stumbling blocks, and therefore then slow you down and can create a lot of stress. So not knowing where to start with designs, or sometimes looking at a blank page and thinking, literally, what do I do now? So that's something we're going to get into today and see if we can help with.
And then another theme that emerged was managing SMEs. So I think we need to tread carefully here because I think some of you probably are SMEs as well as being instructional designers. But, perhaps even you struggle with that, the duality of that role of being the SME and the designer. So hopefully you can give us a really kind of unique perspective on that. But I think the most common challenge here is around aligning on a shared vision and getting to a place where you have that trust that means you can kind of get into reducing content down to the bare minimum in the service of a more effective learning experience.
Coming in at number 4 was also was learning engagement, which we can see in our chat as well. So people have mentioned participation, getting full engagement, and keeping attention, which are all related to this. So it's an interesting one that in some ways it's less of a process headache, but it's something that causes stress. So how do I create something that's genuinely going to boost learning engagement, is going to connect with people? How do I best do that? So that's come up a lot in our conversations with authors out there. And we've actually done previous sessions around engagement as well for that reason.
Yeah, and then the final headache in this initial list was around the QA phase or the quality assurance phase. And it kind of aptly comes at the end of this list because it often comes at the end of the project process as well. And I think something that everyone agrees is really important, even critical to the success of your projects, but it can also throw up challenges which are kind of amplified by how late in the process they come. Nobody wants to be rethinking designs or thinking about global text amends when you're a week or two away from launch. So I think that can be a real pain point for authors.
So that's what we got from our survey, wasn't it? If that's triggered anything for anyone and you've now want to share some other headaches that you're having or some other stress points that you're having, then do feel free to put them into the chat.
Yeah, and I think triggered is probably a good word there, and hopefully that list wasn't too triggering for you all. When we were putting it together, I think it definitely called to mind some of the more stressful times throughout my career. But from this point on, it's going to be all about kind of solutions, so tips and tricks for avoiding or at least minimizing the impacts that some of these headaches can have on your projects. So as I mentioned earlier, my team here at Elucidat is involved a lot in content creation. We've all got a lot of experience in production as well. So Kirstie and I are going to be sharing some of the tips and tricks that we employ to help our projects run as smoothly as possible. But we're kind of keen for this to be a two-way street, so we just don't want to be talking about our experience to you. We're really keen to hear your experiences as well. And I'm sure there'll be tons of kind of tactics that you've developed throughout your careers as well that will be of great help to your peers. So yeah, please be as active as you want in the chat, and we'll bring in your comments whenever we can.
Brilliant. So we're going to give some focus to that, those early stages, that whole area of getting started. And the reason for that is one, because we know it causes major headaches for many, but also because getting off on the right foot with your project efficiently and effectively can actually reduce stress and headaches that you can have later on. So it's a really important part of a project to focus in on. So I wanted to open up for your opinions. What do you think can make it difficult to get started? So if you're a bit more of an experienced designer, perhaps you want to put yourselves in the shoes of a new designer, or perhaps sometimes you also hit stumbling blocks of where to get going with the project. Anyone got any thoughts of what can make this a difficult area for authors? We'll be sharing our thoughts in a moment if none come up. I think sometimes that blank page experience that some people kind of, literally don't know. They can see maybe maybe they've been given some content, maybe they've been given some sort of steer, but looking at a blank page, they're not quite sure how to turn it into something. So knowing what options are available for engagement and Elucidat someone's book, the layout or flow, so knowing exactly how to structure, looking at needs, that's really important. Okay, well, keep your ideas coming, and we'll make a start on our slides as well. Thanks for those. So in our experience, the root cause of most kind of failed projects, and this is Will and I's opinion, so feel free to disagree, is that having unclear goals or perhaps no goals at all has happened. So the whole goal setting has been skipped. Now we think it's really, really important because what can happen is if you don't pin down the goals or the needs of your project, is that perhaps you start with content. Perhaps if you're given some content, you could simply import it, perhaps as your first move, without thinking about the goals and needs of your project. So what have you done as a result? Then you've probably made more content. You've kind of done a random act of learning. So it may or may not hit the mark. You just don't really know because you might not have goals, you might not have clear goals. So you might have made more content in a different format, but it might not have created a learning experience. Setting goals is also really important because having no goals means having unclear roles and responsibilities. So it can cause confusion when it comes to later stages of a project and particularly around reviews. But it also means that if you've got no goals, you've got no measures, so how can you prove the impact of what you've done? How can you prove your value of your project and indeed for the job that you've done? So pinning down goals is really, really important. And particularly for learners, because there's nothing more important than knowing what their needs are, who they are, and on how you can then design for them.
Yeah, just as you started there, Kirstie,
Yeah.
Jen came in with exactly that, not having a defined purpose or
Thanks, Jen.
objective. Yeah, spot
I got distracted by your just the target emoji in reply, so
on.
nice and succinct. So what we really like on the side of is always starting with questions. So making sure that you can capture some needs by asking some questions up front. Now, some people will spend a long time doing an upfront needs analysis for a project. And of course, it depends on what kind of project you're working on, how large it is, how important it is to the business. But we would say that even if it looks like a fairly small project, always take some time to do this part of a project. Even if it's just 1 hour to capture some needs, it will make a massive difference. So we're going to share some of the questions that we like to ask to help you pin this down. Feel free to add to that in the chat. So some of the ones that we like to ask, for example, are, around what kind of change or outcome you expect this project to bring about. In some ways, that's justifying why it deserves to exist, so why are you doing it, really? That's what the question is about. So tap into your kind of inner 5-year-old and ask why many times in different forms, and that will kind of generally help you. What does success look like, or what does good look like, is a question that's often asked. It's one of our favorites. And a lot of questions around their audience. So who are they? What's their kind of context? What kind of job are they doing? Why do they need this? How motivated are they? What are they doing right now? And all those kind of questions will help you understand what the performance gap is. So what it is that you need to change. Those people need to change. What do they need to do differently?
Yeah, and I think with that question around audience, there's always such a good opportunity to kind of demonstrate ROI in terms of reducing seat time as well, because building your understanding of the different segments of your target audience means that you can then tailor the approach, and that's a direct cost saving for the business because it means people spending less time away from their jobs. So such a valuable thing to do up front.
Yeah. And one of Laurie Niles Hoffman's favorite questions is, what is the evidence of your need? Now, she asks that at the beginning of projects because sometimes you can feel like you're getting a project flung over the fence at you. And perhaps you want to check out whether it's a real project, whether it deserves some attention. I'm sure you're getting pulled in multiple ways at any given time. So is there an evidence of need? And by knowing what metrics are showing there's a need there, so perhaps sales are dropping, or customer satisfaction's dropping, for example, in a certain area, then that helps indicate what sort of measures or KPIs you need to look at when it comes to measuring the impact of your project too. So some of these questions are wrapped up into a short guide that I'm sure many of you heard of. It's the most popular guide that Elucidat has, and it's called the Capture Guide. It's available on our website. And it allows you to do very kind of quick needs analysis for any project, and also document your goals so that you can move on kind of solid footing. So Will, I think you're going to speak through this next scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've done your capture, you've got your goal in place, you've got your source material in place. So in the example we've got on screen here, the source material is that documentation that kind of sets out the approved processes that underpin sales. So what do you do now? How do you get from this place where you've done that great upfront work through to a place where you've crafted a learning experience that's actually going to drive the outcomes that you've identified? And absolutely key to this is mapping useful content. And I think the key word here is useful because, whether you're an SME or an instructional designer, you'll know that there is always a lot of content to kind of draw from, but what is the content that's going to truly support your desired outcomes? And when we're thinking about this, we always try to think about the more behavioral side of things and ask, what do we want people to be doing? What do we want people to be doing differently? And how can we give them the opportunity to practice these things? And that's not to say that anything that isn't a practice opportunity is irrelevant, but all the other content that goes into your module should be at least kind of supporting those practice activities. So it could be providing, really essential information about a process, like the example we had on the screen, or insights. So could it be demos or really instructive case studies? And we always try to ask ourselves and challenge SMEs to really consider what information is truly kind of pertinent to helping people understand what they need to do differently and how you can motivate learners to actually embrace that change. Because it's one thing showing people what you need to do, but showing them why they should do it, why they should care, is also, is equally important. Including all of that kind of superfluous detail, that stuff around the edges, which is kind of related, but maybe not directly, can actually really get in the way of learning. And it's a real skill to be able to recognize what's essential and what can be kind of put aside, and then to kind of really confidently stand by these judgments and actually kind of promote them to stakeholders as well. And I think the main kind of takeaway from this exercise is to just remember that you've heard people say content is king. I always like to say source content is not king. So don't assume that just because this PowerPoint you've been given has been used for a decade for face-to-face training, that doesn't mean that it's the structure is sound or all of the information it contains is relevant. So just be prepared to challenge people and also to be challenged yourself. And I like to think of it as a kind of quest for like maximum relevancy. So can we really justify the inclusion of every bit of content that is in this learning experience?
I always say context is king, so I always flip it to context. That's my little phrase. Yeah, Colin Davis says everything has to earn its place. Nicely
Yeah.
put. Yeah, 100%. Okay, so many of you hopefully will be doing this. In fact, maybe you can share in the chat if these are some of the things you already do. But sometimes that feeling of how to get started, that you've got a blank page maybe can be easily overcome by looking at some examples, using a template as a starting point, or perhaps borrowing or duplicating parts from other projects that already exist, particularly if, and especially if they're aligned with the kind of goals that you're doing. So if you know you're going to be creating lots of product training and lots of product training already exists, you might want to look at those kind of templates or projects that exist already. Or it might be that you look at some examples and you set yourself up with a template that you can reuse. So I think this is the point where it's about being smart and not feeling like you have to design everything from start, from scratch. There's Duolingo doesn't change its whole design for every language it trains you on. It has set templates and layouts and structures, and it's bringing those in, obviously because it's trying to meet the same kind of goals every time. But it's not starting from scratch. They're not like, okay, well now what do we do for this? It's reusing things all the time. So just wanted to put that one out there, particularly for newer authors who might feel like they need to come up with something from scratch.
And
And
nice
someone's
from Andrea there, just saying that she loves the examples on the Elucidat website. Very helpful and inspiring. So thanks very much, Andrea. And I guess just to call out to other people that those examples are there, and a great source of
and lots
inspiration.
of those exist as templates as well, or can be gifted into your account if you're a Elucidat customer for you to use and adapt as well. So shout out to the Learning Consultancy team for creating all of those.
Thank you.
So we wanted to open up how people might be using AI and open up with a question really, because I think probably lots of people are using this in different ways to try and get ahead, particularly perhaps up front in a project. So if you've been having a go at using various AI tools, perhaps you can share what you've been doing to help you either speed up or be more effective with your designs. Anyone got thoughts on that? Anyone got any ideas to share? I'm having a look over at the chat. While you're having a think, oh yeah, great. So work with it to create a goal and outline. Yeah, brilliant. That's a good idea. Sort of like a framework for a project. Turning content into video scripts. Nice, we're seeing more and more of that. That's interesting. So more might come in. Some of the ways that I use it quite often as kind of like a brainstorming partner. Not that I don't have real life partners like Will to brainstorm with, but sometimes you can kind of obviously work with humans and work with AI in different ways. So you can give it set parameters, feed an audience profile, your goals for your project, tell it which authoring tool you're using, the context for the learning, and you can get it to play the role of a modern learning designer and ask it to help you generate some ideas or some sample structures, for example. You can also ask it to review your ideas using the same kind of persona, so you can set up custom GPTs to help you there. Lots of people use it to help them with copywriting. So if you're a subject matter expert, perhaps you know your area of expertise to the nth degree, but writing that in a way that helps communicate it to people perhaps at a more entry level, you might need some help perhaps to adapt the language, or it might be about bringing it in tone or into the style of your business. What else have we got in here? So generating graphics, ideas to help with branch scenarios and challenges. What should be in a course, a kind of structural help. And uploading PowerPoint, asking AI to give us an e-learning script. Okay, interesting. Yeah, and obviously that's a capability you can do with lots of authoring tools and with Elucidat itself. I would just throw back out there, just be mindful of what your goals are for your project before you sort of play around with content, but I'm sure that's something that you're doing already.
Yeah, I really liked Jiang's point there around working with it to create a goal and outline, because I think a lot of people do default to the content side of things rather than using it as a kind of strategic partner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think structures in, lots of people do that for workshops as well, for face-to-face stuff
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, brilliant. So loads of ways you can do that to get ahead, but it's, it's not the only way to do things as well, is it, Will?
No, it's quite a nice counterpoint, really. So you've got this emerging tech in AI tools, which are obviously becoming more and more a part of our lives, both in the professional sphere and kind of in our leisure time as well. But at work, I always like to think that, the post-it is still so powerful, and I always have a stack of post-it notes on my desk and use them for, design things or just thinking about anything really. I just find it so useful to be able to write these little headings, move them all around, screw some up, and kind of throw them over my shoulder if needed. Try not to hit a colleague. But obviously, it doesn't need to be actual paper. Just working in some sort of format that enables you to easily move things around, try out different ideas, test assumptions, and it can just be such a huge time saver doing it in one of those formats. And I also really like it for collaboration as well, because it also means you can bring other people into that process. So we've been talking about SMEs and other stakeholders. You can bring them in just to show them a really high level plan for a structure and get their initial feedback, let them kind of get involved and move things around as well, rather than investing a load of time into something that may just need to be ripped apart, which is actually quite a nice segue into talking about working with SMEs. So I don't think we've had anything in the chat so far about working with SMEs. So be keen to,
Maybe everyone's finding it plain sailing all of a sudden.
yeah, or maybe everyone here is an SME.
Um,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, we touched on it earlier a little bit when we were talking about the importance of distilling the source content down, and trying to ensure that it's all directly in support of that behavior change that we're looking to affect. But there are other elements of that kind of designer SME dynamic, which I think are really important to the success of a project. And maybe you'd say they can either make or break a project. And I think the first thing for me is clearly establishing roles and responsibilities. So doing that at the outset and ensuring that all parties are aligned and comfortable with who's going to be doing what. So everyone's had their expectations set about what is being asked of them and what other people around them are going to be doing as well. So you could even think about formalizing this into, I'm sure you're all familiar with RACI charts, but some sort of framework like that that gives real visibility and absolute clarity to expectations across the project lifecycle from all of the different people involved. And then the next thing I think is looking at what you can do to foster true collaboration, because, obviously you can add review milestones into a schedule, but that doesn't really do much for creating buy-in and advocacy for the process. So think about what you could do to, maybe it's about reducing anxiety or resistance from a stakeholder, and creating a really positive and productive environment for everyone to operate within. And then the final thing is thinking about whether you could involve your SMEs in the running of a pilot phase. So it's a good example of how you can allow them to get hands-on. Perhaps it's an early proof of concept that you've got their buy-in for, and now you actually want to demonstrate to them the impact that this could have. So you could run a small pilot group, and perhaps you could bring the SME or stakeholders in to observe that, or at least observe the results of that. Look at that feedback that you get from the pilot group and then kind of say, okay, let's have this discussion around what that means for this proof of concept we developed and how we're going to refine that, use that feedback to inform the design going forward. I think that really kind of helps build confidence in the process, but also in the approach that you're proposing and trying to get buy-in for.
You've given me a nice little segue into reviews as well there, talking about doing pilots along the way. Do chip in if you've got further points that you'd like to raise, ask, or just offer up in relation to any of the things that we're talking about here as well. So reviews and QA often comes up. I would hope it wouldn't be as cumbersome as it used to be years ago, where we didn't have tools in app to kind of help us, collaborative tools that we now have available. But back in the days of tracking down spreadsheets, trying to work out who said what at what point, hopefully some of that is behind us, but it's not always. So I think one of the things to bear in mind with reviews is that there's different types. I'm sure it's kind of a fairly obvious thing to point out. I think we can sometimes forget this, and too often people will go and develop a project and wait until the very end to then share it with people, depending on the size. But they might do a good old chunk, maybe half an hour or an hour, depending on how long what they're developing is, of kind of content before they open up for review. So I think it's worth thinking about the different types of review, mapping out what you need early on. And we say this not to overwhelm those who are kind of maybe newer to projects. It doesn't mean you have to do all of these, but it's different when you're testing out whether the approach and styling is, feels right. We would always say do an early check-in. If you developed maybe 5 pages, I would say, get check in on how those are feeling, whether the approach is right, particularly if it represents your learning approach and the kind of styling that you're going to be using in the copy that you're developing, for example. Factual accuracy is a different kind of check. That's particularly with a subject matter expert, for example. User or learner experience is a whole different thing again. So testing it out with end users, checking that that it meets its goals, or that they can work their way through it and they can find what they need to find. There's a whole different level of kind of reviews. And then, of course, there's kind of general quality assurance. So is it consistent? How does it work on mobiles? Is it accessible, etc., which often has to take place. So there's lots of different types of reviews. And as I said, I'm not saying that we need to kind of do all of these on your project, but I think it's worth thinking about who you need to kind of bring in. And whilst you need to formalize the kind of roles and responsibilities, you can also break these down and do them along the way. You don't have to wait until the end. So there's ways to do it kind of fairly quickly. So many Elucidat customers will be familiar with a review feature, for example. But the reason I want to call this out is that, yes, it's a review feature, but it's also a collaboration feature. So in a given project, you might work on certain parts. So sometimes at Elucidat, when, for example, we're working on projects, it might be that we tag Debbie from the learning consultancy team in to help with some illustrations or animations or styling, because that's her sweet spot. It's not her only one. She's lucky to be multi-skilled, but that's where we tag her in, and she'll come in and do those parts on a project, for example. Someone else might be a subject matter expert, and we need them to add in some examples or some case studies to a given page that we've set up. So yes, you can see the review feature as a review tool, but it's very much a collaboration tool that you can use along the way to bring different people in to do specific jobs or check different things. So I think that breaking down like what it is that you need people to do, what you need them to check, can help you overcome some of the kind of hurdles or stresses that can come about from doing reviews all in one go. So we have whistled through lots of different areas there, and hopefully some useful tips. I just want to kind of quickly stop check and just, if you've got other things, other headaches that you're feeling that you want help with, then do put them into the chat now, because we can always follow up by email, and we'll be putting some tips together in our follow-up anyway. So do now speak and we'll capture them and follow up with you afterwards. In terms of what we've covered today, then I'm just going to open up my slide because I didn't realize it was staggered. There we go. Get all of those out. Then we have whistle stop tour through 6 key tips, starting from capturing needs, making sure you're mapping useful content and experiences to the outcomes that you need. Remembering you don't have to start from scratch, think about reuse, duplication, use of templates, making sure you've mapped things out on paper, or indeed using AI to help you do that kind of structural view on your project before you dive in. Being clear on roles and responsibilities or remits, and then thinking about review and collaboration as you go. And those are wrapping up lots of things, lots of detail underneath them, but hopefully by bearing those in mind, it can help overcome some of those stresses that people find on projects, particularly on their first ones. So keen to hear from you in that last minute. If you can let us know if there's one actionable takeaway that you'd love to take away from today's session, then drop it into the chat. And I'm going to hand over to Will to tell you about learning consultancy.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that the learning consultancy team at Elucidat is responsible for providing services to our customers to support them with any challenges they're facing. So if anything we've spoken about today has kind of resonated with your experience of content creation, and you're still feeling a little bit uncertain about how to kind of tackle some of those challenges, how to optimize your processes and your approach, then please don't hesitate to get in touch, and we can take the conversation forward and talk to you in a little bit more detail about how we can support you.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we'll probably move on to say thank you very much for joining us. I can see a quick question in there from Andrea about the collaboration aspect, the review tool. Not everybody has to have a license. You can tag people in to review parts of your project without them having to be an Elucidat author. So we can follow up with that. And Natalia, if you reach out to us with a bit more detail about AI and change of language, then we can help you as a follow-up. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for joining today. And hopefully you've got some key takeaways from it.
Thanks very much, everyone.